All right, Dr. Jonathan Larson, they're all
Thank you.
yours.
Can everybody see the three nasty critters there?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so we're going to talk about some pain and woe tonight. Going to talk about a couple of my least favorite organisms that are a part of my world, the ticks and the chiggers, and those biting pests and their biology. Also talk about some prevention methods for them. And then we're going to end by talking a little bit about hornets. They've been in the news a lot lately, and so I wanted to share some facts about the Asian giant hornet, otherwise known as the murder hornet, that's been in the news a lot. And we'll also talk about the European hornet, which is one that we actually find in the Appalachian region. So a lot of pain and woe here for us tonight. I wanted to start by talking just a little bit about why ticks are a priority issue. We're going to focus mainly on those for a lot of the evening. Ticks are a big issue for the University of Kentucky Entomology Department because over the last few years, it seems like there's just been a ton of inquiries about these pests. I've only been with the university for about a year now, and from my experience, this is the number one thing that I get asked questions about. Everywhere I go, this is what people want to talk about. I get a lot of samples of them, and we even get some from the medical campus. They bring them over in pea cups, and we have to identify the ticks for them. So that's been a huge thing just in my year here, and I understand the couple, 3 years before that, there was also a lot of questions and inquiries that were coming in about ticks. I think that there's a few reasons for this. Ticks are always of interest to the general public. They're one of the big disease vectors that we have in the United States, really second only to mosquitoes across much of the country. And those tick-borne diseases are always of high interest. So when we talk about tick-borne diseases, the most famous one is Lyme disease. I think that's one of the big things that people in Kentucky and other states want to know about is where is Lyme in their area and are they at risk of being exposed to ticks that are carrying it? And then that's kind of an old issue at this point. Lyme has been around for a long time. There's lots of changing information about Lyme and things that we learn about like chronic Lyme disease. But we're starting to see other problems arise in the tick world. One of them is this invasive species that you see on the left there. That's the Asian longhorn tick. And we'll go into more detail about it here in a little bit. But suffice to say, any invasive is bad. And this one is particularly bad. It's going to be a threat to some of our wildlife as well as some of our cattle growers or cattle farmers. And speaking of cattle, the alpha-gal red meat allergy is the other thing that I get asked a lot of questions about. This is a tick-borne situation where a tick ingests a sugar molecule, and once it's inside of their saliva, which kind of happens on accident, the next time they bite you and they inject that saliva into you, your body has a strong reaction to the sugar molecule, and because it came from a deer which has red meat, the next time that you eat red meat, you start to have some very allergic symptoms, even all the way up into anaphylaxis. So a lot of food is kind of off the table for these folks. And wherever I go, I meet somebody seemingly that's been diagnosed with it. It just is a growing issue in this country. It's much more prevalent than we had previously believed. So these things are all kind of fueling this interest in ticks. For Kentucky in particular, I just wanted to share that we're really interested in ticks because they are a threat to our equine and cattle industries as well. Kentucky has the largest cattle industry east of the Mississippi River. We would be considered the premier equine state by most folks except for Floridians, maybe. So there's a lot of money tied up in these animals. And this is more of a welfare issue. There's some disease vectoring that happens with them. But if ticks end up on cows, those cows aren't going to gain weight as fast. And then when they go to market, you may not make as much, or people just may not be satisfied with the product that you're offering. For horses, it's more of a general well-being kind of thing. The horses are suffering. They may not be as good of racers or may not be as good of breeders. So we are worried about, especially the invasive tick, ending up on these prize four-legged animals. We're also worried about ecotourism. Ecotourism is a big industry for the Appalachian region. People want to see the natural beauty that we have, and some of them want to come down and hunt for it and fish for it. And all of those folks that are outside enjoying nature, they're putting themselves in really prime kind of ticky habitat. And they deserve to know what's around them, what ticks they may be at risk for encountering, as well as what possible pathogens they could encounter. And the same is true for people who work outside. We're trying to help out road crews and landscapers and foresters, anybody that's out in these habitats where the ticks are. So we have a graduate student that's dedicated to a tick survey across the state. She's going to be finding what ticks live in each county and then what pathogens they're spreading in those counties as well. She's also keeping an eye out for that invasive tick, that Asian longhorn tick. Those are kind of our priority goals. In terms of tick biology, they're really interesting little creatures. I mean, they're the spawn of the devil basically, but they're really interesting spawns of the devil. They are ectoparasites, which means that instead of getting inside of your body and feeding on you, they're on the outside. So they attach themselves to the skin and they're sucking blood out that way. They can feed on lots of different things. We have ticks that like birds. We have ticks that like lizards in some states, but we have a lot of ticks that like mammals. And because of that, some of them will readily feed on humans. Ticks start as an egg. The egg is small. They're usually laid in a pile. It looks kind of like a little pile of caviar almost. That's the only way I know how to describe it. And once those eggs hatch, out is going to come a larval tick. If we start on the left of these cartoons here, that's a larval tick illustration. They're very tiny. They only have 6 legs, which is interesting because ticks are arachnids. So later in life, they'll have 8, but they start with these 6 initially. At this stage, they're usually going to be feeding on smaller creatures, mammals like mice or other small rodents. They do get on people sometimes, and that's what we call the seed ticks. Those are the ones you get by the hundreds on you, and they can be hard to get rid of, and they're very difficult to just kind of rip off by hand. Sometimes people use duct tape, in my experience, is what people have told me. So we have a picture of some here in the mouse ear, and you can see they're plugging in and feeding. Once they finish this feeding activity, they'll drop off the mouse, and then they will molt in the grass and become a nymphal tick, the next stage. Now they have their 8 legs, and they start to hunt bigger game, things like rabbits. So we can see some on this rabbit's face and up by its ear. The one by its ear may be an adult tick, but the ones towards the front, I think may be nymphal ticks. So again, they're feeding on this blood. They're going to fall off and molt, and then they will become an adult. Adult ticks are the ones that most often end up on humans. We can get these other stages, but in general, we get the adults on us, and these are the ones that we worry about with disease transmission the most. It can happen with the other stages, but it's more common at this point. We also find them on cattle, deer, horses, and dogs. We have a picture here of a dog that has a tick on its back, and if you part the hair, you can find the tick hiding out in there. We want to keep our animals nice and happy, so if you have a dog, I hope you do regular tick checks on it. But again, they're feeding, they're ingesting that blood. This time they're going to fall off the animal. They're going to crawl through the grass, find one another, maybe put on some Marvin Gaye, and then they're going to mate, and they're going to make the next generation of ticks. In terms of how they live, ticks are what we call hematophages. They have to digest blood. They can't survive on anything else. They don't eat pollen, they don't eat grass, they only eat blood. They're just like Count Dracula or other vampires. Once they ingest that blood, they're going to digest it and use it for nutrition to molt, or if they're a female, to make the next generation of eggs. They have some traits that help them to be really successful at this. One is their ability to swell. Ticks can start out kind of seed size, like a jalapeno seed size, or even up to a little closer to a sunflower seed in size. But then they're able to expand their body hundreds of times to become blueberry size or grape size and fill with fluid. One of my favorite jokes I've seen on the internet is that these fully engorged ticks you see on the left are the new flavor of fruit gushers, that you can pop them in your mouth and get a nice blast of protein flavor. It is gross that they're able to do this, but it's also very helpful in terms of tanking up on enough food that you only have to feed a few times in your life and you're going to be successful. The other thing that's important to note here is that ticks can wait up to a couple of years between meals and still survive. They don't starve very quickly. So if ticks aren't encountering the mice or rabbits that they need, or even the deer or people, they can wait out that lean period for up to about 2 years. And that means each individual tick could live possibly maybe 4 or 5 years if it's not finding enough food. Usually they're done by the growing season and have an annual life, but some of them are going to have to live longer because they're not finding the food that they need. The last thing that I'll mention about what makes them good at their job is their mouth part. So they have this rigid saw-like mouth, rigid saw-like tongue really, that has backward-facing spines. At the tip of it are chelicera. These are sort of like spiders' fangs, except they've been modified to be more scissor-like. And they slice the skin, and then they insert the hypostome. This is the tongue with the hooks on it. And you can see it in the diagram, and you can see the bottom of it as well in that close-up image. It is a nasty piece of work. Once it's inserted into your skin and into your flesh, those hooks are set. And if you try to pull on the tick, it's very difficult to get out because those hooks are kind of catching and tearing as you're yanking it out. They also, when they bite, they start to leak saliva into you. So they're drooling into your body at the same time, and their saliva is kind of cement-like. and it helps to anchor them in place where they can remain attached for 7 to 10 days if they're left undisturbed. I've had people bring me ticks they found crawling on them. I've had ticks that people have found that were probably on them for 1 to 10 hours. But I have had some clients that have brought me fully engorged ticks, and it's been a week or 10 days after they went camping or hiking or took their dog to the dog park. The one that really sticks out in my mind, I used to be in Nebraska, and this woman called and came to the office, and she had a tick that she wanted me to identify. And we went through everything, and she said that she had been sitting in her armchair reading, and she felt something weird under her shirt near her belly button. And when she lifted her shirt up, this fully engorged tick emerged from her innie belly button and started crawling down her stomach, and she could feel it. And so it's kind of horrifying to think that they could sneak up on you and hide like that, and you don't know that they're there sucking your blood out. It's easy for us to find them in a lot of cases. It's harder for animals, of course, but sometimes with people, they do remain attached for that full period. In terms of what species we're worried about, we have 3 primary tick species that can impact human health in the Kentucky and Virginia area. So the 3 that we're going to talk about tonight are black-legged ticks, also known as deer ticks. Those are the ones on the top row in the diagram on the left. We've also got Lone Star ticks, also known as turkey ticks or turkey mites. You can see them in the middle row. And then in the final row, we have the American dog tick, also known as the wood tick. With each of these, they have unique things about their profile and about their body that separate them from each other, also their size and coloration, and also the places that they like to live. It's also important to point out that these are pretty well established across much of this region around Kentucky and Virginia. The American dog tick is one of our more common tick species kind of across the nation. You can see in all of those yellow areas, that's where it lives. So it's a New England to Florida pest all the way out into the Great Plains. And there's even some populations in California. The Lone Star tick is a little rarer comparatively. It's not all the way out west. It's not up into Minnesota and the Dakotas very much. And it's not all the way up towards the Canadian border in New England either. The black-legged tick is one that has an interesting pattern. It's very common in New England and all the way down south. They have different biologies in the north and the south in terms of avoiding heat, some of the things that they like to feed on. But we've also got this pocket of them in the Wisconsin and kind of northern Illinois, Indiana area. They didn't used to be considered very common in Kentucky, but it seems like they're moving in. We're coloring in more counties for them, and it seems like they're just becoming more of a pest in this area of the world. So they are established here. These are all 3 found here. Just to talk a little bit about each of them, the American dog tick tends to be what we call a quester. If you can see me right now, I don't know if you can, they tend to get to the end of a blade of grass or a leaf, and they stick their front arms out, and then they just wait there for something to walk by. And once it does, they'll grab a hold, kind of shimmy up its leg, and give it their little creepy hug where they start to bite it and drink the blood of that animal. They don't fall from the sky or anything like that. There's lots of people that have asked about if birds drop ticks on you and things like that. Most ticks are at about waist to knee height. That's where they like to hang out because that's where a lot of animals are going to be walking by in terms of our profile as humans. So these ones are questers. They don't get too active. The American dog tick tends to live along grassy areas and paths and trails. They tend to like it a little more open above them. They can get into the woods, but tend to be more common, it seems like, along paths and trails where the grass is kind of pointing out towards where things are walking. The adults of this species are active April to August, so they're out and about right now. If we look at the 2 in the image here, we have a female on the left and a male on the right. If we look at the top of them, you can see what helps to separate them. The male's back is entirely covered by what we call a scutum, which is just a sort of shield, and it protects his head from about the base of his head all the way to his rear end. And they don't expand as much, the males don't. And so he's very hard on the top, makes him harder to squish. The female needs to expand more, so her scutum is reduced. It's kind of this lace collar that you see around the top of the abdomen here, nearer to the head. I think it looks like a lace collar or kind of a cream-colored horseshoe, whereas the male looks more like he has an ink blot test on his back. So these ones are pretty common. According to the graduate student, Anna Pasternak, that I've been working with, these are the 2nd most common ticks that she has collected and received samples for. They are the main vector in the state for Rocky Mountain spotted fever. and they can also vector tularemia, also known as rabbit fever. The Lone Star tick is the one that Anna has gotten the most samples about, so it's very common. It's also more aggressive than the American dog tick. Where the American dog tick likes to wait for something to walk by, Lone Star ticks will chase you down, man. Like they're like the Walking Dead sort of. They will chase after you, climb aboard you, and drink your blood. And it's really freaky to watch that happen. And people often end up with numerous Lone Star ticks on their lower body before they plug in, trying to get them off. So these are more commonly found in and near wooded areas. The adults are kind of active April to August, just like the last species that we talked about. In terms of differentiating the adults, the male on the right there, he's very nondescript. There's not a lot to point to. He has yellow lines that appear. He has kind of a crimped looking edge like a ravioli. The female is much more noticeable, and we also tend to interact with her more. So she is kind of an orangey shape or orangey color. They're both kind of rounded in shape, which is different than the other species of tick. And she's famous for this white dot on her back. They get their name from that white dot as the Lone Star on their back. They also have longer mouths compared to the other ticks that we're going to talk about tonight, and that's the other thing that helps to separate this species out. This one is pretty potent in terms of being a disease vector. They can transmit ehrlichiosis as well as Rocky Mountain spotted fever. They've also been found to transmit Heartland virus, STARI, which stands for Southern Tick Associated Rash Illness, kind of a Lyme disease adjacent disease, and then the red meat allergy. That alpha-gal that we are going to talk more about a little bit later, it has been found to only be vectored by this tick so far. We are looking into other ticks, of course, to make sure that that's the case, but this is the main one for that red meat allergy. The black-legged tick is the last tick I want to mention. That's the native one. It is greatly feared for their association with Lyme disease. These ticks are the only known vectors for Lyme disease on this side of the country. If you go to California, you have another option. But here in the Appalachian region, it is solely associated with the black-legged tick. And that's very good news. The black-legged tick, it gets its name as a deer tick, its other common name, because it mainly feeds on white-tailed deer and lives in the forest and associates with those animals. People do come into contact with them frequently, especially during the months of October to May. Those are the times when the adults are active. Their life cycle is kind of reversed compared to the other species of tick. So any day above freezing, if you're out in the woods hunting or hiking or just having a good time, you are possibly able to run into a black-legged tick. They're active on any day above freezing. Now the male and female look very similar. The male has that scutum again all the way to the tip of his abdomen, so he's more of a brown color, whereas the female is a brownish black color that transitions to more of a reddish orange. We tend to interact more with the female. The males can be found, but the females are more common. These are capable of transmitting Lyme. They can also transmit anaplasmosis, babesiosis, and Powassan virus. So this is the tick that a lot of people ask questions about. And I wanted to also point out the Asian longhorn tick though. So those are all native ones. And now we have this invasive one that might be moving in. So this tick is weird. We're going to talk about why it's weird, but you can see when we look at it here, it's not especially interesting looking. It doesn't have any patterns on its back. There's no extravagant looking pieces of its body. It's just a very plain brown, kind of leathery looking tick. The only distinct thing about it is the thing that gives it its name is its legs in the front are longer than the rest of the legs, and that's why it's called the longhorn tick. This is an invasive species, as I mentioned. It's from Eastern Asia. It was accidentally introduced sometime before 2015. It was first confirmed in 2015 in the state of New Jersey. The New Jersey area has a lot of invasive species that have started there. Japanese beetle got its start in New Jersey. The Jersey Shore people got their start there, and so did this tick. It was found on a sheep farm there, and when it was confirmed what it was, they started to look around more for it. They found it in the state of New York. They have found it in Pennsylvania. I know we've got some folks from Virginia on tonight. You can see that it's all down through kind of the spine of Virginia there. There's been multiple finds for it. It's in West Virginia. A very worrying find over in Arkansas that seems to have skipped a lot of Tennessee and Missouri and parts of Kentucky. But there have been some finds down in Tennessee and North Carolina. So far, we have 2 confirmed reports in the state of Kentucky. They were both in eastern Kentucky in what I believe was Harrison County. I can't quite remember. Maybe somebody will correct me in the chat when I get done here, but it was found in eastern Kentucky on some elk that had come in from West Virginia. I'm still learning my Kentucky geography. There's 120 counties to remember here.
It looks like Martin.
Martin County. Thank you. That's it. Yes, Martin County. That is where it was found in the state of Kentucky. Those are the confirmed ones, those two there. There is currently an unconfirmed find in the southern portion of the state on the Tennessee border. I don't have all the details of that. I just know that the Department of Public Health is looking into a find, and there may be an announcement in the next week or so about what they found down there. Hopefully it wasn't this tick, but it's possible we'll have a confirmed find down in the southern portion of the state. Now, the reason this tick is worrying, the reason it's kind of astonishing, is because so far in the United States, we have only found female ticks. We have found no males, which means that it's reproducing asexually in this country. They have not mated. The female is able to basically photocopy herself and generate the nymphs and larvae that she needs to kind of continue the population. So this is sort of like aphids. When aphids get on your plant, they enter usually an asexual phase where they're able to photocopy themselves, and an aphid can build a population up really, really quickly, and it can really harm your plant. Now imagine that with a blood-sucking creature that's on an elk or a deer or a cow on a farm. This could have really catastrophic effects on these animals because they can't get the ticks off fast enough. If people aren't monitoring the situation, you could see this explosion of ticks in a matter of weeks on the creature that normally would have taken months or years to occur. So we're very worried about what this means. But so far, no disease transmission has been reported with this species in the United States. It has pathogens, it vectors in its native range, but so far those pathogens haven't been found in the United States, so it can't vector them. It has been found that it can pick up the bacteria responsible for Rocky Mountain spotted fever, but the last I heard, it had not been confirmed that it can take it out of its body and put it into another host, meaning that it doesn't actually vector it. So if it can do that, then we have to start worrying. But if it can't move it from its body into another host, which is what my hope is, then maybe we can still say it's not a disease vector in this country. But we're keeping an eye on that. The bigger issue is that it gets on these animals and it explodes this population. And there have actually been 2 cases in Tennessee where calves were exsanguinated by these ticks. So they were bled to death by ticks on their body, which is kind of an extraordinary thing to hear. And it's something that's very startling because cows are managed. We have people going out checking cattle, and it was able to do this under the shepherding of some farmer down in that area. Just imagine what this means for deer or elk or other wildlife in an area where this tick gets loose. We could see animals just bleeding out into arthropods that leave their body. It's something that kind of scares me, this idea. It's probably not going to be a huge issue for people. I mean, we would find the ticks on us before they did this to us, but for a wild animal, it could mean almost a death sentence to get these ticks on it. So we are monitoring the situation very closely. The reason that we're very worried about it in Kentucky is all of that welfare stuff that I just talked about, but also because of the distribution maps that have been generated. This is the map that was made by the Center for Vector Biology, and they made this map and kind of generated what they expected to happen once this tick got loose. The darker the red an area is, the more likely it is to be infested by Asian longhorn tick. And if you look at that map, you can see the state of Kentucky is almost entirely maroon. I think there's a few counties down in the southeastern corner there that aren't the dark red, but for the most part, it seems like the whole state is going to be prime habitat for this tick. They're going to move into the bluegrass, go on the Bourbon Trail, see the horse farms, go out and see the Mississippi River. They're going to love it here. We're very worried about that happening. So we do need to monitor it, and we need to have a control strategy plan in place. In terms of the diseases that we've talked about, the reason that ticks are such good vectors is because of the way they feed and what they feed upon. Since they're feeding on blood and they're sucking it up, keeping some of it in their body, and then they go and feed on another host later, those pathogens that may have gotten inside of them can be moved from one animal to the next. This is not an exhaustive list of tick-borne diseases, but it's pretty close. You can see lots and lots of famous tick diseases on here. I just want to point out the ones that are most common in Kentucky. Now, Anna, the graduate student I've mentioned a couple times, she works very closely with the Department of Public Health, and she's gotten some statistics from them. And one of the more alarming things I have seen come from those folks is that at this point in time, 80% of arthropod vector disease in the state of Kentucky comes from ticks. So they're outpacing mosquitoes at this point, which is quite a feat for disease vectoring. So there's a lot of this happening, and there's multiple things that are associated with this. Anaplasmosis, ehrlichiosis, they're not as famous as some of the other diseases, and we're not going to talk about them too much tonight, but they can be vectored by these ticks. Lyme disease is probably the most famous. Rocky Mountain spotted fever is in a close second place. Then we have Stari, which is that southern tick-associated rash illness. It presents very similarly to Lyme disease, but is vectored by the Lone Star tick instead. Then we have tularemia, also known as rabbit fever, and the red meat allergy. So antibiotics can treat all of these things that I've talked about tonight, except for the red meat allergy. The others are all caused by a bacteria and therefore can be treated, these highlighted ones here. The red meat allergy, as an allergy, you have to talk to an allergist and usually kind of wait it out instead of getting medical intervention for it. I want to talk a little bit about Lyme and some of the other things that I just mentioned there, but I really want to highlight this one. There's always lots of questions about this. It's spread exclusively by the black-legged tick, as I mentioned. It's caused by a bacteria called Borrelia burgdorferi. And when you get it, what happens is usually you end up with a high fever, you get fatigue and stiffness, so sort of like a flu kind of symptoms. And then the thing that a lot of people, but not all people, get is the arrhythmia migrans bullseye rash, which you can see in the image on the right. So at the center is the tick bite, and then you get these kind of concentric rings around it that highlight the area where the tick bite occurred. Not everybody gets this, so not everybody knows when they end up with Lyme. Lyme disease is not passed from the tick into the human until about 36 hours into feeding. It's not instantaneous. If you have a black-legged tick on you and it's still relatively small or it hasn't plugged in at all, then it's unlikely that you've picked up Borrelia burgdorferi. If it looks like it's been feeding for over a day, or if you know that you were outside a day or a day and a half ago, you may have ended up with the pathogen being passed to you. And you'll want to take some medical steps at that point. You'll want to see your physician, and you'll want to tell them what you have, show them the tick, tell them what you're worried about. And I think you're within your medical rights to ask to be put on a round of antibiotics just to preventively treat the Lyme disease. If you miss the early control window for Lyme, you can get chronic Lyme, which is a sporadic appearance of symptoms throughout the rest of your life. It presents in multiple ways. I don't fully understand chronic Lyme because I'm not a medical doctor, but my understanding is that you can get versions of it that are associated with the central nervous system, where you end up with paralysis. There are others that are associated with the heart, which ends up with sort of a heart disease-like symptom. It's something that sounds very frightening. So if you've been bitten by this tick and you're worried that it's been on you for over 36 hours, I would encourage you to tell your doctor you want a round of antibiotics just to cut that off at the root. In Kentucky, we've always sort of had this interesting history with Lyme. Kentucky has not historically been considered a Lyme disease state, but between 2012 and 2018, there has been a 57% increase in cases. They are still mostly associated with border counties. They are infiltrating towards the center. You can see Fayette County is one of the leading counties in this 2017 map. We're down in Lexington. But the problem with this is that this is where the disease was confirmed by a physician. Not all physicians try to confirm Lyme disease cases. And this also doesn't tell you where they picked it up at. These Fayette cases could have been locally transmitted, or this could have been somebody that visited relatives over in Martin County or Pike County and then came home and was diagnosed with Lyme disease after being there. Or they could have been out in the Cincinnati area and picked it up there. So we're trying to figure out where this is. Anna, when she collects ticks from the different counties, she actually grinds them up and pulls their guts out, and then she tests their guts for this bacteria. And she's trying to figure out exactly where it lives and how common it is across the state. That'll be very important information to have. The other disease I wanted to highlight is Rocky Mountain spotted fever. They're trying to change the name to rickettsia spotted fever. because Rocky Mountain spotted fever sounds like it's more common out west. In truth, that's just where it was discovered, was kind of in the high Rocky Mountain ranges in Montana. It's actually more common on this side of the country. It could just as easily be the Appalachian Mountain spotted fever. It's spread by the American dog tick. It's caused by a bacteria called Rickettsia rickettsii. The common symptoms are high fever and body aches, but mostly we look for this appearance of red spotted rashes on the palms and soles of the feet. You can see them on this patient here, starting at the bottom of the foot and kind of working their way up. This is painful. The blood is rupturing under the skin like this. It doesn't disappear when you touch it. You feel very sick. You kind of get knocked on your back from this. I had a boss when I was in Nebraska that he was a Boy Scout troop leader, and he took his sons and their troop out, and he got this. And he was hospitalized for over a week with it. It used to be far more deadly. It actually killed a lot of pioneers, and they didn't know what was happening to them. They just described these symptoms on their feet, and it was eventually figured out it was being caused by this tick. But it's something that is treatable now if you go to the doctor, but there are still fatalities that occur here. We've actually seen a 290% increase in cases in Kentucky between 2012 and 2018. That's a little alarming. It doesn't mean that thousands or hundreds of thousands of people have it. It just means that it seems to be on the rise. The American dog tick has to feed on you for about 4 to 10 hours in order to pass this bacteria on to you. These bacteria are not normally at the front of their body. They're kind of way back in the back gut, and they have to keep filtering things through their body. When a tick is feeding on you, they're kind of constantly puking into you and sucking your blood and their puke back up and filtering it through them. And eventually they get to the back of their stomach and they push these pathogens into us. The final issue I wanted to talk about is that red meat allergy. So it's transmitted by the Lone Star tick. It's caused by a sugar molecule called alpha-gal. Alpha-gal is found in all red meat, including deer meat, but mostly we're talking about lamb, pork, and beef. You can see a lot of cuts of meat on the right side of the screen. If you end up with this molecule in you, then you're not going to be able to eat any of this. Bacon, meatloaf, it's all kind of off the menu. What happens is the Lone Star tick bites a deer, which doesn't, I think the current idea is that doesn't happen very often, but they bite the deer, and when they filter the blood in, this molecule, for some reason, gets stuck in the mouth of the Lone Star tick. Once it's stuck in the mouth, it gets in the saliva, the tick bites you, and the saliva goes into your blood. Your blood and your body recognize this as an invader, and they begin the allergic response. So they start sending out things to combat this invader, and then your body kind of calms down. But then the next time that you eat a cut of red meat, your body recognizes this molecule that's in the food you just ingested, but now it's in your stomach. So it starts to send the response to your stomach area. So you end up with nausea, you can end up with diarrhea, mucousy stool. There's also people that get really bad headaches and hives. There's even people that get anaphylaxis if they're a more allergic type person. So there's an allergic reaction happening to ingesting red meat. It usually happens about 4 to 6 hours after you've consumed the meat product. Some people have this so bad that they actually start to react to soaps and lotions that contain meat-based products as well as a lubricant. So they have to start switching detergents and soaps and lotions as well. If a tick has the alpha-gal sugar molecule in its mouth, the moment it bites you, this happens basically instantaneously. So there's no luck in getting the tick off before they pass it to you, because it's hanging out in the mouth, in the saliva, and they start pumping the saliva in pretty quickly. You end up with this inside of you. The allergists that I've heard from on the internet and read through their papers, it's all that they can say is that it takes time to get over this. It can be weeks, it can be months, but in a lot of cases, it's 2 to 3 years before your body kind of gets over this. And in that meantime, you're eating chicken, turkey, and fish. If you can't eat those things, or if you don't want to eat those things, if you're more vegetarian or vegan, you're going to be feeding solely on soy and other plant-based proteins. It changes your diet, it changes the economy quite a bit, because people will be buying sometimes more expensive types of food. So if you're worried about this, talk to an allergist. If you are worried about your diet, talk to a dietitian. If you can find one at the grocery store or through your medical provider. But this is something that we're still trying to get more of a handle on. It's something that's very strange and seems to be more prevalent than we had previously thought. So ticks can be active year-round, as I've kind of talked about, depending on the species. They're going to be active throughout the summer as adults, or they're going to be active throughout the winter. The high tick season, the tick-tock tick time in Kentucky is this kind of May to June time frame, though. This is when we're encountering the adults all the way down to the nymphs and the larvae. It's also when we're just seeing explosions in them. And people need to be very aware of this, and they need to take some precautions. There are some simple economical measures that you can use. One is to wear light colored clothing. Ticks are dark in color, so if you're wearing light colored clothes, it's easier to see them when they're crawling on you. You can wear sleeves and pants to cut off access to your skin. And one thing that I like to do, I know it makes me look like a dork, but I tuck my pants down into my socks or into my boots. This cuts off one of the easy avenues that ticks have. They can get on your shoe and start crawling up your pant leg and you can't see them. If you tuck your pants in though, you're cutting off the access to that highway. The other thing that you can do is perform tick checks regularly on yourself, on other humans in your family, as well as your pets. You should also treat your pet for ticks if you can afford it. Talk to your vet about what they recommend. But when you do this, you're preventing your dog from picking these up and getting things like Lyme disease. You're also preventing the dog from picking up ticks and bringing them into your house and letting them loose where you sleep. If you sleep with your dog, we have had people that have gotten a tick that crawled off their beloved pet and then crawled onto them and bit them overnight. So in terms of where to check for ticks, you're going to look in your hair, all around the top of your scalp, all around the sides, into your sideburns. You're going to look in and around your ears. You're going to look under your arms and your armpit, inside of your belly button, as cavernous as it may be, depending on how big you are, I guess, if you're like me. You're going to look around the waist. You're going to look in the groin, and you're going to look behind the knees. You can do this in the shower. You can sit on the toilet and bend over if you can't see some of these different areas, or use a mirror. If you're feeling romantic, you can ask a loved one to do this, and maybe they'll help you to find some of these critters while they're crawling on you. If you want to take more precautions, a skin-applied insect repellent that we use mainly for mosquitoes can help to keep you safe from tick bites. It's not 100% against ticks, but these do help. DEET is the standby. The higher the percentage, the longer it lasts for you while you're outside. 100% DEET or 98% DEET usually is a little much if you're just going out and gardening for 30 or 45 minutes. You might want to go for a 20 or 40% DEET solution. But if you're going hiking in the woods, or if you're spending a lot of time camping, you might want to consider those higher percentages. They can last up to 10 or 12 hours. If you don't like DEET, or if you're allergic to DEET, that does happen to some folks, look into picaridin. That's the one on the far right in my graph here. There's also IR3535. It's a terrible name. I don't know why they call it that, but it is another insect repellent that helps a lot of folks out, and it can last for up to 8 hours. It's the one in that kind of yellow-orange jug on the left side. And then if you're into more of a botanical approach, oil of lemon eucalyptus does help to repel mosquitoes and ticks for about 6 hours. Aside from a skin-based repellent, you can use a permethrin treatment on your clothes and on your gear to help further prevent ticks. Permethrin should not be put on the skin. It should only be applied to these inorganic objects like your clothes or your backpack, what you're taking into the woods. It is an insecticide. It will kill the tick, and it can help by doing that, but it's not something you want to treat directly onto your skin, and you want to keep it away from cats. It's not good for cats to be exposed to. So once you apply this to your clothes, it's going to last for about 8 to 10 washes. You can buy permethrin impregnated clothes from camping stores or Amazon, and that can last for 30 or 40 washes. And so what happens is the tick crawls up onto these treated clothing objects, and once it does that, it picks up a lethal dose of permethrin, and it keels over and dies. Usually what people find is they get home, they take their clothes off and they kind of shake them out, and a dozen ticks dead will fall off their clothing that have gotten stuck there. So it helps to prevent that bite from ever occurring. If the tick does get through all of these defenses that we've talked about, you can remove them, and you should do so as soon as possible with pointy tweezers. If you do a lot of hiking or camping, I would encourage you to keep these in your pack, but you want some fine needle-nosed tweezers that you can get right up close to the skin with, grip the tick's head, and then pull straight up. With doing this, you don't want to grip the tip of the abdomen, the butt end, because you'll squeeze it like a toothpaste tube, and all the stuff that's inside of it will go into your body. And when you pull on it, you're kind of doing it like you do when you pull a cork out of a bottle. You're doing it steadily, but you're not yanking it out. You're not wiggling it out, hopefully, and you're definitely not twisting it around. There's a tool that I've seen a few places called the tick twister, and you're supposed to put it over the tick and then spin it really fast like a tornado in their logo, and it works the tick out. When you do that, you're breaking off pieces of the tick in your skin, and that can lead to secondary infections. So you just want to grip it firmly and pull steadily straight out. In terms of other things people do, like fire from a match or a lighter, or an alcohol on top of it, or essential oils, it's true that these things will kill the tick, but you want to do it after you have pulled it out. If you do those things while the tick is attached to you, it will vomit into you. And no matter how long it's been attached, you're increasing your likelihood of pathogen transmission. So pull it out. After you do that, I would encourage you to keep it. But if you want to pour alcohol on it and watch it drown, or put essential oils on the top of it and watch it smother, and then you want to curse its name and consign it to Hades, that's fine. Just don't do it while it's plugged into you. I would recommend keeping it just in case you need to go to the doctor, so you can show them what species you interacted with, and maybe they'll have a better idea of what to treat you for. That's it for the ticks tonight. I also wanted to talk a little bit about chiggers. Chiggers are the devil. I hate chiggers. They're my least favorite thing on the whole planet. They are the immature stage of a mite that we call the harvest mite. They're also known as berry bugs. You can see sort of an illustration of them on the right here. They're big, red, velvety mites. They're about the size of a sunflower seed. You can see them walking on the sidewalk in the spring. They're pretty big and impressive critters. They're predators, actually, as an adult. But as a larva, as a baby, they're a chigger. And the chigger is a nuisance to humans and other animals. They get on possums and squirrels and other mammals, and they just cause a lot of itchiness. It's the only time in their life that they're a parasite. They're doing this activity, they molt afterwards, and then they turn into nymphs and adult mites that are predators. They feed on insects and insect eggs and vegetation. We actually consider the adult version to be beneficial. So you kind of got to take the good and the bad together here. They're going to overwinter as an adult. That's why we see these in the spring, because they've overwintered as these sort of fully grown larvae or adults over the winter, and they're active early in the season and can kind of start bubbling out. And we'll see them walking across the sidewalk. My daughter caught quite a few this spring, these little mites on her fingers. Now, chiggers are kind of invisible to the naked eye. They're about 1/150th of an inch long. So you rarely know that they're on you or near you. You don't know where they live or where they hide, and you blunder into their little clubhouse out in their environment, and then they climb aboard you and they make your life miserable after that. Chiggers are most active between the temperatures of 60 degrees and 99 degrees. Under 60, you're not going to encounter them. Above 99 on average, and you're not going to see them either. So that gives them kind of this May to late July, early August timeframe to cause all the pain and woe that they do over the summer. Now, there are some things about chiggers that people have been taught that aren't always necessarily true. Some folks believe chiggers drink blood. They aren't blood feeders like ticks are. They don't live inside of you either. Chiggers actually are ectoparasites. They get down really tight and close with the skin, but they insert what we call a stylostome. That's their mouth part. It goes down into your skin, and they start pumping in their saliva, and that saliva actually melts some of your skin cells, and they make this kind of skin cell milkshake that they drink up, and that's how they get their nutrition. It's horrifying as it is. So they're not drinking on blood, they're not inside of you, but they are very tiny and very close to the skin. In these next images, what we see is kind of a diagram of one feeding. You can see the stylosome. It's this long straw-like object down in your skin, pumping saliva in that you're reacting to. That stylosome can also snap off and cause more allergic reaction. If you look in the image on the right, in the center, in that kind of white patch, that reddish object that's projecting up, that's a chigger. So they're really tiny. Those are freckles on the other side of the wound that you can see. So it's a really, really tiny organism. It's hard to see them. This is under magnification. Once they're on you, they can feed for 3 to 4 days unless they're dislodged. We do itch them off frequently, or when we take our clothes off, they can get snapped off. But once they finish, they usually drop off and then they molt to the next stage, and then they're not a parasite anymore. We don't worry about them as much. In terms of where we interact with them, they tend to be in more overgrown, weedy areas, but they can be moved into manicured landscapes by humans, by pets, by wildlife. And once they're transported in there, they find our kind of shrubby areas along the edge of a property or the sort of less manicured areas of your lawn, and they'll take advantage of those spots. Chiggers also like a sort of hillocky habitat. They like those low-lying areas. So if you've got lumps and valleys on your property, those low areas that are kind of more moist, that's where you'll encounter a lot more chiggers. In terms of when I've experienced them, the worst chigger bites I ever got, I was at a museum in Texas. It's kind of a house museum, and I was standing in their lawn next to some shrubs, and I didn't know it, but I was apparently standing in all of the Texas chiggers, and they got on me, and the next day I woke up with hundreds of bites on my calves and ankles. It was awful, and they started to weep. When this happens, to most people, they get these wounds that you see here, these red dots. Some of you are probably psychosomatically itching right now, some of your lower extremities. They like the lower legs, they like the ankles, they like arm and knee pits. We've seen them on the waist, on the groin. They also get up around the bra band on women. Anywhere that the skin is thinner, where it folds, and anywhere where clothing is tight. That's why they like socks and underwear and bras, because the skin is getting pinched by those tight clothing items. It's easier for them to kind of utilize it. Now, when they do this, usually people get these red dots. If you're like me, this can progress to a kind of a weeping sore. All of my chigger bites seem to congeal together, and I get these big blister-looking objects on my skin, and they weep out, and I ruin socks, and my wife gets really aggravated because I won't go to the doctor. This is called chigger dermatitis when this is occurring. There's initially some itching from the first bite that you kind of brush off because it doesn't seem too bad. But then there's an intense itching 24 to 48 hours later that starts to drive you kind of mad. You can suppress this with a hot shower or a cold compress, applying things like baking soda or aloe vera to the bite area. You can also get an over-the-counter topical steroid, like a cortisol, and rub it on you to try and reduce your reaction. Anything that helps your skin to feel better, lotions, oatmeal, anything of that nature. This usually lasts for about 2 weeks, but if you keep itching it, you're going to get secondary infections, and it can last 3 or 4 weeks at that point. In terms of preventing them, the tips are much the same as we see with the ticks. Wearing long sleeves and pants, as well as repellents and permethrin-treated clothing if you're going to be outside for long periods of time, helps with the chiggers. DEET is very good for preventing them. The other thing that we recommend is when you come in from outside, take a shower, wipe your legs down, really scrub them off to dislodge any chiggers that are crawling or dislodge any of them that have already plugged in, hopefully preventing them from feeding further and causing more long-term itchiness. Or if you don't have time for that, just getting a wet washcloth and rubbing your shins, your calves, up into your thighs, down into your ankles off, and hopefully wiping those chiggers off will help to prevent any further issues. Now, if you've got a recurring issue on your own property and you want to deal with it, you can do that through yard and landscape sanitation, doing some bushwhacking, some weed whacking, cutting out these sort of mangy areas reduces where they can live. You can also remove leaf litter in the fall to try and prevent overwintering, and hopefully that will cut them out and you can maybe start to let it go again the next year and not worry about them returning. If you have a persistent issue, a hot spot that you always end up with chiggers in, you can treat that area with bifenthrin. The most commonly available to homeowner version of bifenthrin is called Ortho Home Defense Insect Killer for Lawn and Landscape. The long name, but this is the version of Ortho Home Defense that we can use on grass and on the landscape. And when you treat the areas with it, it's going to kill all those chiggers out. And hopefully you won't see them come back. That brings me to the final bug I wanted to chat about tonight, the hornets. So if you're like me, in the last couple of months, you've heard a lot about the murder hornet. This has been in the news a lot. It has not been found in Kentucky or in Virginia. Its real name is the Asian giant hornet. Entomologists have really tried to fight against the murder hornet name, but at this point, cat's out of the bag. Everybody's calling it the murder hornet. I was getting like 20 or 30 emails a week just titled murder hornet in all caps with exclamation points. asking if somebody had caught it. Nobody so far has called it the Asian giant hornet, though, or very few people have. But you can see this insect here. This is the most famous photograph on the left. It's from the Washington State Department of Agriculture. The one on the right, I think, is from a reporter that went to its native range in Asia and picked one up. Very foolish thing to do, I would argue. But you can see, compared to a human thumb, this is a big stinging insect. So far in the United States, they've only been found in Washington State. In North America, we have also located them in British Columbia, Canada, on Vancouver Island. There's currently no consensus on how they got here. They certainly didn't fly. The leading theory is that somebody imported them either to eat, to grind up into a powder as a virility enhancement drug, or to put into vodka. In their native range, they are sort of infused into vodka and the venom weeps out and you can drink it. And it's supposed to be a really powerful, manly vodka at that point. Those are some of the ideas about how this occurred. Now, Asian giant hornets do cause painful stings. I don't think it's fair to call them murder hornets. They are reported to be responsible for about 50 deaths every year in their native range of Japan and China. But for comparison, we have 50 to 70 deaths every year in America alone from bees and wasps. So 50 deaths across Asia, where we're talking about over 1 billion people, compared to 50 to 70 deaths in this country of over 350 million people, I think you start to see the ratio there. So it's bad news. It hurts really bad. There are photographs of people that have had reactions to their venom where there's local necrosis. So you get these dead spots in your skin. You have to go to the doctor for that. It's not fun, but it's not the end of the world either. It is 2020, so everybody was ready for the next bad thing. And this is no fun. You look on the left there, that's its stinger. It's about 1/4 of an inch long. So part of the pain is just getting stabbed with that. They are aggressive during parts of the year, just like all social insects. They want to defend their colony, and they will do so vigorously. One of the things that we're most worried about with this, though, is if it gets loose in the US or in Canada, it's going to change beekeeping. Asian giant hornets are a predator of European honeybees, which is the version of bees that we keep here in this nation as well as in Canada. What they do is throughout the summer, they feed on spiders and caterpillars and other things. But in the autumn, they switch to feeding exclusively on bees. So what they do is they fly after bees as they visit flowers. They pick the bee up in its mouth, as you see on the left, and they cut the legs off and a chunk of the abdomen, and then they take the head and they take chunks of it and kind of fuse it together into what in the scientific literature is called a bee meatball. They crunch these up and take them home and feed them to one another. The other thing they do is they get into a gang of about 3 hornets usually, and they fly around and find a European honeybee nest. One of them scouts it, sprays it with a pheromone that says this is the one. Then the 3 hornets enter the hive and they kill all the workers inside and the queen, and then they steal all the larvae inside of it and take them home and eat them. It takes them usually about an hour. 3 hornets can kill about 30,000 honeybees. Japanese honeybees, the ones that are more native to that range, are able to fight back. They actually swarm the hornet that's trying to spray the pheromone on the hive, and they heat it up by beating their wings and they bake it to death since they can't sting it to death. So once it's cooked and dead, they throw it outside and the hornets never find that hive to raid. But European honeybees have no defense against this. So we would have to start building different honeybee hives if this were to get loose. There are some lookalikes in the area. The main one is the European hornet on the left there. We've also got the cicada killer and the bald-faced hornet though. The European hornet, I'll show some more pictures in a second. It's more of a red-orange color than the sort of uniform yellow-orange we see with the Asian giant hornet. The cicada killer has a similar coloration to the Asian giant hornet, but its abdomen is thinner and pointier, and their heads are much smaller compared to a hornet head. The bald-faced hornet doesn't have any yellow to it. It's more of a black and white coloration as opposed to the yellow-orange of the Asian giant. So European hornets are fairly common in this area. They are an invasive. They are large. The queens are about 1.5 inches long, and they're brightly colored. They have this red, black, and yellow coloration. The reason that I bring this up is that every sample I have received so far, except for maybe one, has been a European hornet. They look similar. The queen in particular gets confused with the Asian giant hornet, and those are the ones that people are finding right now. The queens overwinter, all of the workers die every fall, and then the new queens come out the next spring, and they're searching for a place to build their nest. It starts as this small umbrella with a cell on the center, and then they keep expanding it once they get workers to the big paper football you see in that person's attic. Lots of people have caught these this year, and when they've caught them, they've seen the news and they think they've captured the murder hornet in their attic or at their cabin. So I've looked at a lot of these this year. In terms of how we differentiate the two, the Asian giant hornet is on the left, has a bigger head, kind of a pumpkin coloration to it. The European hornet on the right, its head is big, but thinner overall from top to bottom. And then it's got this red color on top, reddish maroon, and kind of reddish maroon sideburns on the sides where its eyes are. And that's the way that we tell them apart. That's the main difference. So every image I get, that's what I'm looking for, is that reddish coloration. If you want to take a look at any hornets that you catch, you may notice the same thing. Hopefully we never find the Asian giant hornet here, but invasive species are tough. It seems like they get around pretty easily. With that, I want to say thank you for having me tonight. I appreciate the time and the invite. I hope that you had a good time hearing about some of these bugs. And if you've got any questions, I can take them now. I've also got an email address on the screen here. And if you're on Twitter, I'm at BugmanJohn.
Great information, Jonathan. Thanks so much. If anyone has a question, you can type in the chat pod or feel free to unmute and ask Jonathan. Shad mentioned here in the chat pod, said he had turkey hunted down around LBL in spring, and actually could hear the Lone Star ticks crawling on the dry leaves. There were hundreds. So I've always heard horror stories down around Land Between the Lakes and that. So
LBL, I hadn't heard that about the Lone Star ticks, but that's also where the fire ants are in Kentucky. So I don't think that's at my top of my vacation list anymore, is to go to the Land Between the Lakes.
Beautiful place. Stay on the water.
Okay.
a lot of thank yous there. So some kudos and thank yous. Jaquitas,
Laugh and cringe. That's what I go for. Those are my bread and butter points.
Awesome.
Well, I heard there's hot dogs, so I don't want to prevent everybody from getting to the hot dogs.
And s'mores. Don't forget the s'mores.
Oh, s'mores too, yeah.
Thank you, Jonathan. Great job.
Thanks for having me.
Jonathan, thank you so much. We appreciate you tuning in and coming in tonight. And
what is the best remedy for chigger bites? I would say a steroid compound applied to the skin. That'll help reduce the reaction. Cortisone, things like that will help.
Good information.
Guess what my mother's remedy was when I was growing up as a kid? She would mix
oatmeal?
No, she would mix salt in lard and rub it in areas where we were itching.
Did it help?
It was miserable. Try to go to sleep with that covered all over your body.
So it made you forget about the chigger bites, is what
Yeah, absolutely. Salt and lard.
My mom was big on Absorbine Junior, if you can remember the green Absorbine Junior.
That doesn't sound fun either.
Good information. Good stuff. Good stuff.
Have a good night, everybody.
Hey, Phil, do you wanna cover quickly what's going on Thursday evening?
Yes, we have a regional FCS agent's going to be talking about wise food shopping, how to plan and how to spend your money wisely when you shop for food, and how to do so on a budget. So,
good deal. Sounds good. Jonathan, thank you again.
Thanks.
Everybody, I guess we'll see you all Thursday evening.
Stay safe and happy, everybody.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Enjoy
Thank
the
you, John.
sports.
Will do.